Hello. So for our very first lecture in Nutrition Across the Lifespan, we're just going to be covering some really fundamental information that you learned in your Fundamentals of Nutritional Sciences class. And for this very first module, 1.1, we're going to be talking about dietary intake standards. So all of you know from your basic nutrition class that there's basically 6 classes of essential nutrients. The macronutrients, carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids, the micronutrients, vitamins and minerals, and of course water. And these nutrients have many different functions. Several of these nutrients have more than one function, but of course the macronutrients are providing energy. All of them are. We need them in gram amounts, whereas the micronutrients are more involved with promotion of growth, maintenance and repair of tissues, and regulating body processes. Lipids, which is what I study in my lab, so you might want to get to know them, are important in promoting growth, repair, and maintenance, and we'll go through some of those mechanisms in this class, as well as regulating body processes. And of course, proteins are components of enzymes, also components of carrier molecules for different fat-soluble nutrients as well as minerals. So proteins have a lot of functions, and they're structural. And so they also provide growth, maintenance, and repair functions as well as regulate body processes. And for a couple of different parts of this module in later lectures and slide decks, we'll talk about the macronutrients in one part of the module, micronutrients in one part of the module, so you get a brief review of those. So in nutrition, the word essential has a very specific meaning, and it means that nutrient is required in the diet because your body cannot make it. So, all of you know there are 9 essential amino acids that are required. You don't make them through protein synthesis. And there's 2 essential fatty acids, okay? 9 essential amino acids for making proteins, 2 essential fatty acids for multiple cellular processes. And the 2 essential fatty acids, and I do want you to know these 2, are alpha-linolenic acid and linoleic acid. One fatty acid is an omega-3 fatty acid, and the other one's an omega-6 fatty acid. So non-essential nutrients, examples are things like cholesterol, creatine, glucose. Your body can make these, but we often see people take these in their diets in part because they want to increase the levels of these or decrease, maybe in the case of cholesterol. And they are still important in growth, maintenance, and repair of tissues, and sometimes we think we need more than your typical body might need. And that's where personalized nutrition comes in, where what I need as a 56-year-old woman may not be what Susie, a 56-year-old woman, needs, because we come from different genetics. So requirements for essential nutrients, of course, depend on, top of the list here is age. And of course, that's what we're covering in Nutrition Across the Lifespan. But of course, all these other things affect your requirements as well, and those things come into play at each stage of our lives. So body size, gender, genetic traits, how you metabolize things. If you metabolize things really fast, you might need more of that component supplied in your diet. Growth, growing, we're trying to capture a person in time to know how much they need for a nutrient, but often for children's nutrients, there's been a lot of discussion about changing the requirements to be per kilogram body weight, because 2 9-year-old children can have very different body weights and very different body compositions. If someone's ill, oftentimes they might need a different amount of some nutrients. We know people with cancer cachexia, which is a muscle wasting disease that accompanies some types of cancers, they need a lot more calories because their bodies are hypermetabolic. And so to keep those people from really literally wasting, we have to supplant some of the energy that they're using with more energy and calories. Physical activity. We know athletes might need more calories and maybe even sometimes more protein. Medication use. Medications often have conflicting effects on absorption of nutrients and or metabolism of nutrients, and that could affect, of course, someone's nutritional status. And pregnancy and lactation, which is a huge, as I mentioned in my introductory to the course slides, it's a huge time of very rapid growth. And going through a pregnancy, you learn how rapid it is. It's kind of amazing. And so in those rapid times of growth and in lactation, where you're producing a lot of milk for the newborn, those things do require extra nutrition. So the dietary intake standards that I want to cover today are the dietary reference intakes, the DRIs. These are issued by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Math, or NASEM. This is a group of scholars who pull together other scholars who are not necessarily in the academy, and this is called an academy. That's an invitation-only academy, where scholars come up with recommendations for dietary allowances, which we call the RDAs. They also come up with adequate intakes, as well as other DRIs. So the very first type, and the type we usually consider the most often and traditional, is the recommended dietary allowances. These are levels of essential nutrients where the scientists thought we had enough data to set these recommended levels to be adequate for most healthy people and decrease risk of certain chronic diseases. Now, this latter bullet here is not often included in the current RDAs. So what we're seeing is some of the RDA levels for nutrients are being changed each year, and we're just getting started in that, we, the nutrition community. Sodium, I think, has been addressed, or is being addressed right now. I think vitamin D was addressed, and calcium. But RDAs change as we get more information about how nutrients contribute to health and prevention of diseases. Adequate intakes are sometimes called tentative RDAs. These are RDAs that we don't know exactly what you need, but we know that with a population with that current level, with this overall population of a certain age group and gender, that those people are seeming to be healthy with a certain level. And so that's what adequate intakes are. Again, it's tentative because they're not really based on a lot of evidence yet, because we just don't have enough. And estimated average requirements are estimates for meeting requirements of half of the healthy individuals in a group, and they're used to assess adequacy of intakes for population groups. So estimated average requirements are really kind of, again, average being right in the middle, 50%, okay, which is half of the healthy individuals, and what those levels are to kind of gauge where somebody is higher or lower on that. Tolerable upper limit is, of course, as it implies, the upper limits of nutrients that are compatible with health and that are not associated with, that are associated still with safety. If someone exceeds upper limits for a particular nutrient, and they're doing it habitually, meaning over many weeks, months, or years, that's when they actually have a big risk for being in toxicity. So here's the theoretical framework for how the DRIs are established. Remember, RDA is the type of DRI that's most often used for nutrients that we have plenty of data for to know what is recommended, and that would be what's recommended for most of the population. An adequate intake is a guesstimate, that's why it's a dotted line here, an estimate of what could be most needed for most of the population to prevent deficiency, but we don't know. Tolerable upper limit is what we don't want to exceed, okay? And that otherwise, if you start exceeding that, that's where you see the risk of overdose or toxicity. And estimated average requirement, which is where 50% of the population is for meeting a nutrient need. And this is what we often use as a gauge for understanding how somebody may or may not be in a state of deficiency or sufficiency in their intake. So the RDIs are one type of recommendation. Then there's a set of guidelines that the USDA came up with based on the RDIs for nutrients, and really more for foods and food patterns to fulfill the needs of RDIs, okay? And the reason the dietary guidelines exist is we know people don't eat a food that's just one nutrient, right? We know people have more than one nutrient in a food, hopefully. Because of that, we know people go to the grocery store and don't say, oh, there's my niacin source, oh, there's my folate source. They go to the store to find breads and leafy green vegetables, which are sources of those two vitamins. So what the USDA and the Dietary Guidelines Committee has done is come up with recommendations that will fulfill most people's RDI requirements, okay? So the Dietary Guidelines is issued by the USDA, and again, it's every few years, I think it's every 5 years, the Dietary Guidelines are updated based on the newest science with a Dietary Guidelines Committee. Some of those committee members have been at The Ohio State University in the past and present. The dietary guidelines for Americans use what's called an acceptable macronutrient distribution range, which is for the macronutrients, the three that we have: carbohydrates, proteins, and lipids. And those are based on percent of calories. So the AMDR set by the dietary guidelines is 45 to 55% carbs, 10 to 35% of your calories from protein, 20 to 35% of your calories from fat. Then within these three macronutrients, there's a few other dietary guidelines. For carbohydrates, get half of your grains whole. Avoid additive sugars and high fructose corn syrup. Okay, so that's some of the carb sub-guidelines. There's also one, I think, for increasing fiber. Again, for protein, there's suggestions on how to get enough protein without consuming a lot of fats or processed foods. And for fats, how to increase your intake of healthy fats and decrease your intake of unhealthy fats. So there's quite a few things beyond what I'm showing you here for dietary guidelines, but it's really a simple tool to help guide most Americans who may not be involved in science to understand how to meet their dietary needs. Well, there's another, of course, tool, and you all know about it, that's useful for all people who can read. They do have to be able to read for labels, which is the Standards of Nutrient Intake for Nutrition Labels. Again, this is set by the USDA, and the labels are established based on a theoretical daily intake used to meet someone's needs, who is an adult greater than 4 years old, but an adult who is consuming 2,000 calories per day. So on the nutrient label breaks down per serving how much of that person's requirement for a typical adult eating 2,000 calories per day is going to need. Forget the 4-year-old thing. That's confusing. So adult, 2,000 calorie a day, theoretical person is what's used on a label. The key elements of the nutrition label are the nutrition facts panel, the ingredient label, which is by mass, the list of ingredients from highest weight of the food product to lowest weight or mass. For dietary supplement labeling, there's actually some different requirements. This is actually for dietary supplementation of foods. So for enriched products, which are those products where they had a vitamin maybe, and the vitamin was removed during processing. Enriching is adding back that nutrient, and fortification is adding a nutrient that never was there in the first place. So those have to be listed, of course, on a supplement label as separate nutrients. And then herbal remedies also have to have a nutrient label. So here are two examples of the nutrient facts panel. You've seen them all before. I do want you to be able to understand how to calculate if there's 8 grams of fat in a 2/3 cup of whatever this food is. Let's call it a macaroni and cheese, and I don't know what it was. 2/3 of a cup of it is your serving size. In 2/3 of a cup, you get 230 calories. And of those 230 calories, 8 grams of fat is contributing to those calories, right? How much of your calories is this fat. So you can go back to understanding how this relates to your AMDR, which is percent of calories from fat. Then you can figure that out. So total fat, total carbs, sugars, and protein are up in this quick facts. Avoidance nutrients or compounds in the diet are listed here: saturated fat, trans fat, cholesterol, sodium, added sugars. So this is sugar, period, and this could include natural sugars. This is added sugars in the processing of the food. And then other things can be added at the whim of the food manufacturer. And these things here are fiber, vitamin D, calcium, iron, and potassium. I guess these are not at the whim. These are actually required. Yeah. I don't know why I said at the whim. Okay, and this is just the same information in a different format. Yeah. This is not in your book, but we will get back to this concept quite often in this class, which is what a nutrient-dense food is versus an energy-dense food. And basically, it's a ratio, and there's no definitive nutrient-dense food is good for you at this certain number, or energy-dense food is bad for you at this certain number. It's just we want to have a higher nutrient density food and lower energy density foods, especially when we're working with populations that need to watch their body weight, keep their body weights from increasing or their BMIs from increasing, and in children, keep them from exceeding their weight for height growth as they're growing. So nutrient density is the ratio of nutrient to energy, and we want that to be higher. And if a food is energy dense, it means the energy to nutrient is higher, meaning you're getting more calories than you are per nutrient, basically. So in the life course approach to nutrition, we will be covering some really important aspects of understanding how to meet nutritional needs across different stages of life, okay, in general. We'll talk about some dietary considerations based on ethnicity. For instance, there's a huge group of people immigrating to the United States, and there's prediction that it's going to get higher as aspects of our planet are forcing people out of the countries that they live in, and or regimes that are inhumane. Whatever, as people immigrate into the United States, helping them achieve health is to our interest too, as people who aren't immigrating into our country, because we want them to stay healthy so they can be a contributing part of society. So understanding needs of people who come to our country with different ethnicities, races, traditions, cultural norms is a really important part of nutritional counseling and dietetic counseling. And we'll talk about that, I hope, as we go through this course in lifespan. Of course, other things that affect food intake are dietary considerations based on religion. Again, diets can be defined by cultures, norms, history, food availability. This is actually reverse. It should have been a slide ago, but this is the standards for nutrient intake for nutritional labels. Okay, so you can see all the things that are required. And actually, so that I was correct. Let's go back for a minute. Whoopsie daisy. Okay, so here, these getting enough of are offered by the food manufacturer. They're optional. What I don't see on this label, though, are the requirements for vitamin A, calcium, vitamin C, and iron. And I'm not sure why that is on this. I'm going to have to check on that and get back to you. But these are the requirements currently from on a nutrition label. This is from table 1.3. And again, you see, you do see vitamin. I'm going to argue with myself here. You do see fiber, but you don't see vitamin D. Okay, so these are the required elements for a nutrition label. Don't listen to me. Apparently I should have read my book. I did read my book. I just can't remember everything. Okay, so what affects food choices? We've talked about this, but these are always going to be overlaying what our conversations are when we talk about nutrition in different stages of life. And again, those are what cultural, ethnicity, race, religion, and regions of the world, how those affect food availability and food intake and dietary choices. And so we'll keep that in mind as we go through the course. So that's Module 1.1, and we're done for today.